This is Dr. Supreet Kaur from University of Delhi, and we will be continuing our series on the EXIM, that is export, import and its documentation. So, when we are talking about its documentation, the very important thing is the contract, which is the binding agreement between both the parties. So, when we are talking about these contracts, there are certain clauses, certain basic terms that are very crucial and that forms the very essence of these contracts. So, it starts with the very question of who and what parties are to be involved in case of a contract. So, when we are talking about this contract, we must be very much clear about that what are the parties to the contract and their legal identities. The customer needs to be specified so that they state their obligation to purchase and to pay for the goods or the services. And similarly, it fixes the vendor's responsibility to sell and deliver it to the customer. Now, when we are talking about who and what is involved, it means basically, as I said, that there are the parties, that is your vendor and the customer. So, both the parties need to mention about their legal identities, their full name, disclosure of their areas of operation, their legal identities, their legal names. Maybe because they are, the proprietor is running under a different name and then the firm is running under the different name. So, that ways the company needs to mention about their full legal names. Similarly, they need to state to their customer that that is their obligation to pay and when does those obligations to pay for the goods and services arises. That means if you specify the time period or into the agreement itself that 30 days from now when the goods are delivered to the customer. So, starting that period when the goods are delivered. So, within that 30 days the customer is supposed to pay for the payment. So, that is why we need to specify into the contract that who all are involved and how they are involved. So, that also we are going to come on next, that how and how much is their liability, to what extent it is there. So, that it specifies that what goods and their services are they responsible for. So, each categorization of the things, the very nitty-gritties of the parties involved, they should describe in detail that the goods that they are selling to the customer, and similarly the customer will specify the goods that he or she is seeking for. And when we are saying the goods and services that they are selling to the customer, we need to be very specific about that. Let us say the HSN code number, the quality, the type, the grading, the quantum, the value. So, each and every detail when we are referring to, it needed to be mentioned into the terms of contract, so that there is a clear line of demarcation that let us say if a quantum or if an article A is to be sold. So, what category of A, let us say if high graded is considered as to be 1. So, A1 will be sold or A2 will be sold, which is a little a lower category good. So, that is grading needed to be mentioned into the same, so that both the parties are very clear about the goods and services that they are dealing up into. Then after once this very clause of who all are involved or what are the parties to the contract, the next very question is how much is to be paid. So, when we are saying how much is to be paid, this is a very crucial element, because we will be discussing about that which currency will be used as a barometer. That means if two different nations with their different currency notations that they are dealing up with. So, what is going to be the mediated one? What is going to be the identified currency that is to be used in the contract? So, with respect to the same, the contract would mention that whether the transaction will take place in INR or the transaction will take place in USD or maybe per se for any other currency. So, that ways one need to mention in advance that which is going to be the settlement terms. So, within that your currency also is a very crucial element, because accordingly the price, accordingly the commission would change, right. Similarly, we need to mention about whether the price for the goods that you are trading up, is it fixed or adjustable. Now, if it is adjustable, so then there is possibility that adjustments can be made later on. But if let's say the price is fixed, that okay, 200 units of an article X is to be traded at 45 per unit, so then in that case the price is fixed, which is later on not negotiable, right, or which cannot be adjusted later on. But if I see that the price is adjustable, then that means that the adjustments with respect to the very value of the goods and the services can be changed later on, which may be because of number of reasons, which may be because of cyclical fluctuations, which may be because of some contingencies, some calamities. So, accordingly the adjustments in the same will be made, because if you change this price and if you fix upon this price or make it adjustable, accordingly your total amount that is to be paid to the customer, to the vendor, so that will also change. So the customer needs to be very specified about whether it is going to be a fixed amount or is it going to be an adjusted one. That means there are chances for making some cyclical changes or the fluctuations counted onto the same. So let's say any inflation, any seasonal changes. So, if the time period is very longer, so in that case those adjustments can be made, right. So, that phrase we need to be very clarify when we say that how much is to be paid. So, the contract shall be crystal clear, stating about the currency that is to be used and stating about the pricing parameters to be used. Next is when we say that okay, that we decided about what currency is to be used, next question comes in when and how to pay. Now this is very crucial because we have already discussed about the methods of payment. So therein we need to discuss about the date onto which the payment becomes due. So the date by which this full payment is due, the progress payments if any, it says, and the amount of each. Now what do we mean by progress payments is that in case we are making any installments, so in case of those installments we need to mention about the amount of each and every installment and the very date by which those installments will be paid. And in case you are making it in a full payment basis, then in that case also you need to specify the date. So again, if a customer X says that okay, he will be making a payment within 30 days, so that 30 days shall be counted from whatever being mentioned by them. So the very date shall be specified by which he will be making the payment in lump sum, or by which he will be making an installment based payment, which is a progress payment, depending upon, let's suppose if 15 consignments is to be sent in a one deal. So let's say one set of installment after 3 consignments receive, then another set of your installment when the next very consignment is received. So accordingly the progress, the payments will be made, right. Next is discount to the customer for early payment. So maybe sometimes the vendor would offer a choice to the customer that it will provide the discounts to the customer if the payment is made on advance basis. So we did discuss about those methods of payment wherein we talked about advance payments, we talked about the letter of credit, and we also talk about the documentary credit and various other methods of your payment. So herein, if the option is such which is very secured one, very convenient to the vendor, then the vendor will be in a position to offer some discount to the customer for the payment. So that means if there being any advance payment, the vendor can of course, obviously this is your discretionary thing. The vendor may or may not offer the discount to the customer, but it is most of the cases it is found that when the method of payment is your advance payment, then the vendors do offer such options to the customer to provide them some sort of maybe a 1% or 0.5% discount onto the same. Now, bonuses to the vendor for early completion of the contract. Now, it can also happen vice versa, where the customer can offer the additional payment in the form of your bonuses to the vendor when the consignment is received in you could say in full means and received well in time, in well form. So, those 7 hours in right condition, in right form, to the right person, at the right time, at the right place. So, when we talk about those 7 hours, maybe again this is discretionary, this is not bounded by the or contract that you have to include this element into the contract, but this is somehow accordingly discretionary factor. So, herein also the customer can offer the additional amount in the form of bonus to the vendor in case of early completion. But again, all these things that we are mentioning about, whether the date for which the full payment is due, or whether we talk about the progress payments, or we talk about the discount to the customers or the bonuses to the vendors, in all of these cases you need to specify that in your contract, right, and also mention some terms and conditions attached to the same, because this is not a mandatory note that one needs to add on into the contract, but this is a discretionary one wherein they can decide about when and how to pay. Are there any incentives to offer the special method of payment on an early basis, or whether there are bonuses to the vendor for making early completion of the contract. So, that ways there are elements that can be pondered upon when deciding the terms of contract. Similarly, whether or not you mention about the bonuses or the discount in the contract, but one thing will always be there, that is the penalties in case of late payment and the penalties in case of late receipt of consignment. So, then there will be interest charges, right. So, if the customer is making the payment to the vendor beyond this period of, let us say, 30 days or 60 days, or as it is mentioned in the contract, then in that case, for every additional day there will be a corresponding interest that will be charged onto the customer, and the customer is supposed to make the payment including these penalty charges, right. So, that ways interest charges clause will always be there for this for handling this disputes, for those late payments calls. So, that ways those interest charges, its rate, when will it be applicable, what will be the proportionate basis for the same, what will be the rate. So, everything will be mentioned into that terms of contract. Next is the very documentation that will trigger the payment. Now, when we say trigger the payment, it means that what are those basic documents, whether it is a transportation document or submission of a commercial invoice, or maybe a airway bill, or maybe a shipping bill. So, what actually triggers the payment? That means when you correspond to those Incoterms that we discussed previously, you would see that what are the onus onto the seller and what are the onus there onto the customer, right, the buyer. So, in that ways we can define about, which clearly says about that the the seller is supposed to submit these documents in order to qualify for payment. Even in the payment of methods, we discussed upon that what are the different methods of payment and what are the attaching conditions to the same. That means onto the submission on, let's suppose if you are talking about advance payment. So, what will be the very document that will trigger the payment, right. So, it may be a commercial invoice, it may be a shipping bill, right, it may be a transportation document. So, anyways, like your transportation document, like your airway bill, shipping bill, right. So, that you need to specify about that when submitted or when sent this document, then only the action or the payment will be made. As you can see in letter of credit, until unless you submit a document, that invoice is not submitted, the payment will not be initiated, right. That is a very basic condition in case of your LC, right. Similarly, you need to mention about whether there will be a method, what will be the method of your payment, whether it is going to be advance method, advance payment mechanism, it is going to be a LC, it is open account, documentary credit. So, what method of the payment will the person be agreeing upon? That means both the parties should agree about, and they should be in tandem when discussing about the method of payment, so that your contract should contain the very similar, the one agreed upon method of payment. Then is the payment terms, which can be, many terms and conditions can be attached therein, which can be like, let's suppose 30 days time period, or you could say that submitting the document time period, or it can be like, reaching this part of, let's suppose, any intershipment port is there, so reaching this point. So, any of the payment terms as per the, mutual agreement between the buyer and the customer decided upon, it will be fixed into the contract. Similarly, you need to mention about the holdback payments also. In case any holdback payments are there into the contract, that also needs to be mentioned into this contract. See, whatever you are going to mention into the contract is what will be binding on to both the parties. That is why that contract is extensively, thoroughly read by both the parties, along with their, super specialized team of experts who just make a run through, who just read them, the contract copies, the drafted contract copies very clearly, so as to see about that what are their binding terms and conditions, what needed to be changed in order to convert them into a final, decided upon contract. So, that is why this is very important part of any deal wherein you decide upon the contract, because once decided you cannot step back from the same, because there are legal consequences of the same, and also you are dealing at an international level. So, that is why you know your responsibilities and what you are accountable at the global level, right. So, that is why these are to be very carefully selected upon. The next question that comes when deciding upon these contract clauses is, how does the delivery mechanism work? For that, we have previously read about the Incoterms, right? And Incoterms is something which one needs to be very clear about, whether I need to select X works, whether I need to select the CIF, CPT, or per se DDP or DPT, I need to be very clear about that, because those Incoterms will make you responsible for the cost of your carriage, insurance, import export clearances, packing, documentation, so forth. So, that is why these Incoterms needed to be very carefully decided upon, right. Next is, who is responsible for that transfer of risk or for damages to the goods during their transit from the vendor to the customer. So, from you here refers to your the vendor, right. So, herein we are talking about that who is responsible for this transfer of risk. That means the onus lies onto the seller or onto the buyer. Now, how to decide upon the same? Because it is to be decided through your Incoterms. So, if the Incoterm says so, if it is a CIF, then you have to be very careful about that you are responsible for the insurance, the basic insurance parameter also. If it is X works, then you are only responsible up till making sure that the goods reach the warehousing place, and then thereon the onus lies on to your buyer, from loading to getting those custom clearances, to run through those port and completing those transportation formalities, and then reaching the destination port, unloading, making sure the goods are unloaded very safely. So, all those responsibilities then in those cases will be onto the buyer. So, decide upon that what is your Incoterms. Work very carefully, decide those Incoterms, because this will be there into your contract. because this will make you responsible for the cost of carriage, for the transfer of risk, for the damage to the goods. So, it is for both the customers and the buyers that they need to look upon very carefully, that how to select upon the Incoterms. And also when deciding upon the Incoterms, you need to look into the external environment, that means your competitor strategy, because if it would be such Incoterms which is making it a little difficult for your customer, then the customer will switch on to the next very vendor. So, that ways you have to be very careful upon when selecting these Incoterms, because this is what tell you that how does this delivery mechanism works, right. Similarly, the next point is that how the goods are to be delivered and who will be responsible for the delivery cost, because in those Incoterms, if you remember, you would do how? You would fixate the responsibility of buyer and the seller with respect to your origin, the port of origin and the port of destination, and the corresponding various elements of loading, unloading, shipment, custom clearances, taxes, making it sure to the warehouses, insurance factor, freight thing. So, that ways you be very careful, because those Incoterms should answer these things, should be prepared according to these questions, that how the goods are to be delivered and who will be responsible for this delivery cost, whether the buyer or the seller. And then next question can be like, which port of entry is to be used, whether it should be the port of origin or it should be the port of destination. So, both the parties must agree upon that which is to be used as a very central port of entry, or for making sure that the goods reaches to this destination. There need to be any transshipment ports in between. So, that also to be discussed, right. When deciding upon your contract terms and conditions, then how delivery is to be scheduled. So, delivery is to be scheduled, that means when the delivery will be initiated, the time period of when the delivery will be made, and what will be the corresponding penalties in case the delivery does not happen well in time, what will be the charges for late delivery. So, that also needed to be defined into this contract, right. Another factor is that when deciding these Incoterms is how many shipments are there in the entire order. As we were discussing previously, that let us suppose in an order there are 15 consignments, 15 shipments are there. So, accordingly the cost would differ to the the buyer. The vendor should take into consideration that how many shipments he or she is offering into this entire order, and what is going to be the corresponding freight for the same, because this is what is very important, because if into your Incoterms it is mentioned that the freight is to be borne by the seller, then you have to be very careful that what is going to be the number of shipments, how you are going to cover those freight that you charged up into the contract. Similarly, the customer also needs to look upon that if the onus of freight is there onto the customer, and the number of shipments that are involved in the total order is very great, is very good a number. So, then in that case the entire cost of freight will land onto the customer. So, that they need to look upon that how many shipments are to be involved in the total order, right. Otherwise, there will be delays, there will be lags. So, that is again a problem that would demand the attention of both the parties. So, that is why it is very specifically to be mentioned in the contract with respect to their responsibilities, their accountability, right. Next is what penalties and warranties are there. Now, what will be the charges if the customer fails to fulfill the contract terms or the vendor fails to fulfill the contract terms. So, both the parties must very clearly mention down into the contract the compensation that they will be offering to the other party if they breach the terms of contract. The very interest rate that will be applied to the amount of invoice if the customer pays late. What will be the warranties that will be applicable to the same, what will be the punitive charges for the same, what will be the interest rate, what will be the, you would see that all these questions are intertwined, connected with one another, wherein if there is a delay in the payment, then they have to pay the interest, and that interest parameter is also to be defined one, that what percentage of the interest or what rate of your interest will be offered as in compensation to the other party, and maximum for a what period, and if it is a continuous breach of the terms and condition, then in that case what is going to be the settling mechanism for the same, how both the parties will come to a reconciliation position for the same, what is going to be the mode of resolution for the dispute resolution in that case. So that is very much needed to be mentioned in when we are saying that what penalties and warranties are there, right. Now, when we have talked about those penalties and warranties, we have to be very careful about the time period that we mention along with, right, or any collateral that is being attached to the same. Is there any collateral damage with respect to the same or not? So again, these terms of contract are to be very carefully decided upon, because it actually fixes the responsibility of each and every party with respect to, you can say that their responsibility, their accountability, not with just your terms of payment, but also delivery mechanisms, the type of quality that you are you are dealing up with, the dispute settlement mechanism, right, the cost associated with any exchange mechanism. So that is why all these things are the things that you decide on a on a prior basis, not when the entire contract is executed and later you discuss upon ki, that we missed upon these very factors that cannot be changed later on, right. So that piece you need to be very careful upon when you are deciding upon that what are going to be the settling conditions for both the parties, whether it is buyer or the seller. So that ways both the parties fixes out their responsibilities, their owners, and they mention about that what penalties and the warranties will be applicable in case of breach. We will be talking about the next question, that is how these disputes are to be settled on in the second part.